The great hall of the Galactic Concordat was filled with hundreds of representatives from across the known universe. They came from worlds of ice and fire, from planets covered in endless oceans, and from moons that floated in the light of dying stars. They were tall and short, scaled and feathered, with eyes that saw colors no human had ever named. And today, like every other day for the past 3,000 years, none of them believed in humans. Ambassador Kiravel stood at the edge of the gathering, her forearms folded nervously across her chest. She was young by her species standards, barely 200 years old, and she had made the terrible mistake of reading the old books. The ones that the elders kept locked away. The ones that spoke of Earth. "You look troubled," said a voice beside her. She turned to find Elder Sorvine watching her with his ancient eyes. He was the oldest historian in the Concordat, and his body was bent with the weight of all the years he carried. But his mind was still sharp, and he had noticed Kiravel spending too much time in the Forbidden archives. "I found something," she whispered. "In the old records. Before the silence." Sorvine's expression did not change, but his voice dropped lower. "You should not speak of such things here." "They were real," Kiravel continued, unable to stop herself. "The humans. They were real. The records prove it. They made contact with the Concordat 3,000 years ago. They came from a world so dangerous that their bodies were built for survival. They could heal from wounds that would kill us. They could run for hours without stopping. They formed emotional bonds so strong that they would die for strangers." "I know," Sorvine said quietly. Kiravel stared at him. "You know? Then why does everyone say they are just stories? Why do parents tell children about humans to frighten them into behaving? Why do we treat them like myths?" The old historian looked out at the gathered representatives. "Because myths are easier to accept than truth. Because admitting humans were real means admitting we were afraid of them. It means admitting that we put a quarantine barrier around their entire star system and left them there to be forgotten." Before Kiravel could respond, a loud tone echoed through the hall. The representatives fell silent as High Chancellor Vathan took his place at the central platform. He was a massive creature, covered in plates of natural armor, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. "We have grave news," Vathan announced. "The Vorath Dominion has begun moving its fleets toward our border. They have already taken 3 outer colonies. Their warlord, Drazenkoth, has declared that he will bring the entire Concordat under his rule within 1 cycle." Fear rippled through the crowd. The Vorath were brutal conquerors who saw other species as nothing more than resources to be used and discarded. Their warriors felt no mercy, and their ships filled the sky like swarms of insects. Kiravel pushed forward through the crowd. "High Chancellor, I request permission to speak." Vathan looked down at her with annoyance. "This is not the time for junior ambassadors to voice opinions. It concerns the defense of the Concordat," she insisted. "I have found evidence in the ancient archives. Evidence of a species that might be able to help us. The humans." Laughter broke out among the representatives. Vathan raised one massive hand for silence, but there was amusement in his eyes as well. "The humans," he repeated. "You mean the monsters from children's stories? The creatures who supposedly came from a death world and could survive anything? Ambassador, those are fairy tales. Nothing more." "They are not," Kiravel said firmly. "I have seen the records. 3,000 years ago, humans made first contact with the Concordat. They were quarantined because our ancestors feared what they might become. But they were real. They may still be real." Vathan shook his head slowly. "Even if these legends had some basis in history, what would it matter? The quarantine zone around their supposed home system has been in place for millennia. No signals have ever emerged. No ships have ever left. If humans ever existed, they are long dead." "Or they have been waiting," Elder Sorvine said. stepping forward to stand beside Kiravel. The quarantine was not meant to keep them contained forever. It was meant to give us time to prepare for their return. The laughter died away. Something in the old historian's voice made even the High Chancellor pause. "You believe this nonsense?" Vathan asked. "I believe that we should not dismiss allies when enemies are at our gates," Sorvine replied. "The Vorath are coming. Our fleets are not strong enough to stop them. If there is even a small chance that the human legends are true, should we not investigate?" Vathan was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "I will not send ships chasing myths while real threats approach. The humans, if they ever existed, are gone. We must face the Vorath with what we have." The assembly was dismissed. Kiravel stood frozen in place as the representatives filed out around her. She had failed. No one would listen. No one would believe. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at the old texts she had copied from the archives. Stories of humans who smiled to show friendship instead of aggression. Humans who formed family bonds not just with their own blood, but with strangers they had chosen to love. Humans who would cross the void of space to help those who called for aid. Her communication device beeped. A priority alert from the deep space monitoring station. Kiravel read the message 3 times before she believed it. A signal had been detected at the edge of known space. It was coming from just outside the ancient quarantine zone around a small yellow star. The signal was being broadcast on frequencies that no known species used. And it was repeating a single word over and over again. Elder Sorvine had translated it from the old texts. The word was hello. Kiravel ran from her quarters, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to reach the High Chancellor. She had to make him understand. The myths were waking up. The humans were coming. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The scout ship moved slowly through the darkness of space. Kiravel stood at the front window, watching the stars drift past. She had convinced the High Chancellor to let her investigate the signal, though he had made it clear that he expected her to find nothing but a broken satellite or some natural phenomenon. She did not find nothing. The ship that appeared before them was unlike anything in the Concordat's records. It was long and sleek, built with sharp angles and metal that gleamed under their lights. Words were painted on its side in a language that Kiravel had only seen in ancient texts. Starward Venture. "They are hailing us," the pilot said, his voice shaking. "Answer them," Kiravel replied. The screen flickered, and suddenly she was looking at a human face for the first time in her life. He had smooth skin without scales or feathers, with 2 small eyes that studied her with equal curiosity. His mouth curved upward at the edges, and she remembered from her studies that this meant he was happy, not threatening. "This is Captain Daniel Morrison of the Earth vessel Starward Venture," the human said. "We come in peace. We have been trying to leave our system for generations, but there was some kind of barrier. We finally found a way through. Are you friendly?" Kiravel found that she could not speak. All her life, she had believed in humans when no one else would, and now one was looking at her, waiting for an answer. "Yes," she finally managed. "We are friendly. I am Ambassador Kiravel of the Galactic Concordat. We have been waiting for you for a very long time." The human captain's smile grew wider. "Well then, it's nice to meet you. Would you like to come aboard?" 1 hour later, Kiravel stood inside the human ship, surrounded by wonders she had only read about. The humans moved around her with easy confidence, and she noticed immediately that they were exactly as the old text described. Their bodies were dense with muscle. Their eyes tracked movement with predator-like focus. And yet they spoke softly and laughed often, as if they did not know how frightening they appeared. Captain Morrison introduced her to his crew. Lieutenant Commander Grace Kim was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything. Dr. Samuel Ortiz was their expert on languages and cultures, and he was already taking notes about Caravel's species with childlike excitement. Sergeant Nina Reyes led the ship's soldiers, and she shook Caravel's hand with a grip that could have crushed bone. Engineer Paul Crawford was covered in grease and smiled constantly, proud of the ship he kept running. "We have so many questions," Dr. Ortiz said, practically bouncing on his feet. "How many species are in this Concordat? How long have you had faster-than-light travel? Do you have music? Art? What do you eat?" Caravel held up all four of her hands. "Please, slowly. I will answer everything. But first, I must tell you something important. Something about why your people were trapped behind that barrier." She explained everything. 3,000 years ago, humans had made contact with the ancient Concordat. They had been friendly and curious, much like these humans before her. But the other species had been terrified. Humans came from Earth, a world so harsh and deadly that every creature on it was built for combat. Humans could survive temperatures that would kill most species. They could eat foods that were poison to others. They healed from injuries in days that would take months for anyone else. And most frightening of all, they formed bonds of loyalty so strong that they would die for beings they had only just met. The ancient Concordat had made a decision born from fear. They built an automated barrier around the human system. They told themselves it was for everyone's safety. Then they let the humans become legend, and finally myth. Captain Morrison listened in silence. When Caravel finished, his smile was gone. "They locked us in," he said quietly, "like animals in a cage. They were afraid," Caravel said. "Fear makes people do terrible things." "Yes," Morrison replied. "It does." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Grace Kim stepped forward and put her hand on the captain's shoulder. "What matters is that we're out now," she said, "and we have a choice about what happens next." Morrison nodded slowly. "You're right." He turned back to Caravel. "Ambassador, you said you were waiting for us. Why? What's happening in your galaxy?" Caravel told them about the Varith Dominion. She described their massive fleets and their brutal conquests. She explained how the Concordat was too peaceful, too soft, to stand against them. Millions of innocent people were going to die, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. When she finished, the humans exchanged looks that she could not read. "Let me understand," Sergeant Reyes said slowly. "There's an empire out there conquering innocent worlds, killing civilians. And your Concordat can't stop them?" "We cannot," Caravel admitted. "Our ships are built for exploration and trade. We have not fought a war in over 1,000 years. We do not know how." Reyes turned to Captain Morrison. "Sir," the captain held up his hand. "I know what you're going to say, Nina. These people need help. We're one ship, one crew. We just got out of a prison that held our entire species for 3,000 years. And if we were in trouble," Reyes said quietly, "if Earth was burning and we called out for help, what would we want strangers to do?" Captain Morrison closed his eyes. Caravel watched him struggle with something inside himself. She did not understand humans well enough to know what he was feeling, but she understood the moment when he made his decision. "Dr. Ortiz, contact Earth. Tell them what we found and what's happening. Tell them to start working on getting more ships through the barrier." He opened his eyes and looked at Caravel. "Ambassador, take us to your High Chancellor." It's time the myths introduced themselves. Caravel felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hope, but neither she nor the humans knew that their communications were being monitored. Far away, in the darkness between stars, Warlord Drazen Koth received a report from his spies. The legendary humans were real. They had returned. and they were heading straight for Concordat space. Koth smiled with all 3 rows of his teeth. The hunt had just become interesting. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concordat had never been so silent. Representatives from 100 worlds stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the 5 humans who had walked through the doors like figures, stepping out of ancient nightmares. Captain Daniel Morrison stood at the front, his crew behind him. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply stood there and waited for the High Chancellor to speak. Vathan stared down at them from his platform. His massive body was tense, and his armor plates had shifted into a defensive position without his even realizing it. Every instinct in his ancient blood was screaming at him. These creatures were dangerous. These creatures were wrong. They walked upright and smiled and acted friendly, but underneath that soft skin were bodies built by a planet that tried to kill everything on it. So, Vathan finally said, "The myths are real. We prefer to think of ourselves as people," Morrison replied calmly. "But yes, we're real, and we're here to help." "Help?" Vathan let out a sound that might have been laughter. "One small ship, a handful of creatures from a death world. You want to help us against the Vorath Dominion? Against fleets that number in the thousands? We want to try." Kiravel stepped forward from her place among the representatives. "High Chancellor, the humans have knowledge we do not. They come from a world where survival required constant adaptation. They understand conflict in ways we have forgotten." "Forgotten?" Vathan's voice rose. "You mean abandoned. We chose peace. We chose civilization. We do not need lessons in violence from creatures who spent their existence fighting each other." Grace Kim's jaw tightened, but Morrison put a hand on her arm. "You're right," the captain said. "We did fight each other. For thousands of years, we hurt ourselves in ways I'm not proud of. But we also learned. We learned how to protect what we love. We learned how to stand against enemies who want to destroy everything we've built." He paused. "The Vorath are coming. You know this. Your fleet is not ready. Your people have never faced anything like this. Let us help." Vathan was silent for a long moment. The entire hall waited. "No," the High Chancellor finally said. "I will not invite monsters into our home to protect us from other monsters. The Concordat will face the Vorath alone. This meeting is over." The humans were escorted out of the hall. Kiravel tried to follow them, but Elder Sorvine caught her arm. "Let them go," he said quietly. "You did what you could." "It's not enough," she whispered. "Nothing I do is ever enough." 3 days later, the Concordat Defense Fleet launched toward the colony world of Serenhol. Intelligence reports suggested the Vorath were planning to attack there first. 200 ships flew through the void, carrying soldiers who had never fought a real battle and commanders who had only studied war in theory. They never reached Serenhol. Warlord Drazen Koth had been waiting. His ships appeared from the darkness like predators emerging from deep water. The Concordat fleet was surrounded before they even knew they were in danger. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, not a single Concordat ship remained. The distress signals cut off one by one, until there was only silence. On Nexus Prime, Kiravel watched the reports come in with growing horror. The defense fleet was gone. Serenhol was defenseless. Millions of civilians were going to die. She ran to find the humans. The Starward Venture was still docked at the edge of the station. Kiravel burst through the airlock to find Captain Morrison and his crew gathered around a display showing the same terrible news. "You know," she gasped. "You've seen it." Morrison nodded slowly. The Vorath didn't attack the colony first. They wanted to eliminate any chance of rescue. "Now they can take their time. What do we do?" Kiravel asked. "There are no more ships. The High Chancellor has nothing left to send. Serenhol is alone." The humans looked at each other. Something passed between them that Kiravel could not understand. Some silent communication born from years of working together, fighting together, surviving together. "Not alone," Sergeant Reyes said quietly. Morrison turned to his crew. "I'm not going to order anyone to do this. The Concordat rejected our help. We have no obligation to them. What I'm about to suggest will probably get us killed. So I'm asking, not commanding. Who wants to go save some strangers?" One by one, every hand went up. Grace. Kim began plotting a course to Serenhal. Paul Crawford headed to engineering to squeeze every bit of power from the ship's systems. Dr. Ortiz started learning everything he could about Vorath physiology and psychology. And Sergeant Reyes gathered her Marines in the cargo bay to prepare for the fight of their lives. Kiravel watched them work with tears in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "The High Chancellor insulted you. He called you monsters. Why would you die for people who treated you like this?" Captain Morrison paused at the door to the bridge. He looked back at her with an expression she did not fully understand but would remember for the rest of her life. "Because they need help," he said simply. "That's enough." The Starboard Venture undocked from the station and turned toward Serenhal. One ship, 37 humans, flying to face an armada. Across the galaxy, Warlord Drazen Koth received word that the human vessel was approaching. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt something he had not felt in many years of conquest. Curiosity. The legend said humans were dangerous. The legend said they were relentless. The legend said they would not stop until they won or they were dead. Koth smiled. He had destroyed legends before. He ordered his fleet to continue toward Serenhal. Let the humans come. Let them try to be heroes. It would make their destruction all the more satisfying. But deep in his warrior's heart, in a place he would never admit existed, Drazen Koth felt the smallest whisper of doubt. The myths had called humans many things. They had never called them cowards. And ships that flew alone into impossible battles were not crewed by beings who feared death. The sky above Serenhal was filled with fire. Vorath warships hung in orbit like dark clouds, their weapons raining destruction on the world below. The colonists had retreated to underground shelters, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. The bombardment would continue until nothing lived on the surface. Then the Vorath would land and take whatever resources remained. Warlord Drazen Koth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Hammer, watching the destruction with satisfaction. Another world was falling. Another species was learning the price of weakness. "Sir," one of his officers called out, "a ship has entered the system. Concordat reinforcements?" Koth asked without concern. There were no reinforcements coming. He had made certain of that. "No, sir. It's the human vessel." Koth turned slowly. On the main display, a single ship was approaching the Vorath fleet. It was small compared to his warships. It should have been insignificant. But something about the way it moved made his scales prickle with warning. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. The screen flickered and Koth found himself looking at a human face. The creature's expression was calm, almost peaceful, as if it did not see the hundreds of warships surrounding it. "This is Captain Daniel Morrison of the Earth vessel Starboard Venture. You are attacking a civilian population. Withdraw immediately." Laughter erupted across the Vorath bridge. Koth silenced his crew with a gesture. "You are one ship," he said. "I command an armada. You cannot possibly think you can stop us." The human's expression did not change. "I'm not asking you to fear me. I'm giving you a chance to leave without more death. Take it, and if I don't, then you will discover why the ancient species were afraid of us." Koth cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. "Destroy them." 12 Vorath cruisers turned toward the Starboard Venture and opened fire. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. The human ship did not die. It moved through the wall of weapons fire like water flowing around stones. Lieutenant Commander Grace Kim had spent her career studying combat tactics from Earth's entire history. Every naval battle, every aerial engagement, every lesson written in blood and fire across humanity's long struggle for survival. She applied all of it now. The starward venture ducked and weaved and danced through the Vorath formation. Its weapons were smaller than the enemy's, but they struck with precision that the Vorath had never encountered. Critical systems failed. Engines exploded. Ships that should have been able to absorb dozens of hits were crippled by 3 or 4 perfectly placed shots. "They're targeting our weak points," a Vorath officer shouted. "They know exactly where to hit us." "Impossible," Koth growled. "They've never faced our ships before." The humans had spent millennia fighting each other. They had learned to find weakness in any armor, exploit any flaw, turn any strength into a vulnerability. What the Vorath considered secrets, human eyes could see in seconds. Koth ordered more ships to engage. 20 cruisers, then 50. The sky around Serenhal became a storm of weapons fire and explosions. The starward venture took hits. Armor buckled. Systems failed. But it kept fighting. In engineering, Paul Crawford worked miracles. He rerouted power through backup systems that had never been designed for combat. He patched holes with whatever materials he could find. When a fire broke out in the lower deck, he put it out with his bare hands and went back to work. "Damage report," Morrison called out. "Everything is broken, sir," Crawford replied over the intercom. "But it's all still working. That doesn't make sense." "I know. But that's what we do." 3 Vorath boarding ships managed to attach themselves to the starward venture's hull. Soldiers in heavy armor cut through the metal and poured inside. Expecting easy prey, Sergeant Nina Reyes was waiting for them. The Vorath were larger than humans, stronger. Their natural weapons could tear through metal. They had conquered dozens of species and never met an opponent who could match them in close combat. They had never faced humans. Reyes and her Marines moved through the corridors like ghosts. They appeared from shadows, struck without warning, and vanished before the Vorath could respond. The invaders who expected terrified civilians found predators wearing friendly faces. The old texts had called humans persistence predators. Creatures who did not fight with speed or strength, but with patience and endurance. They could track prey across entire continents. They did not stop. They did not tire. And they absolutely did not surrender. When the last Vorath boarder fell, Reyes stepped over the body and keyed her communicator. "Deck's clear, Captain. Ready for the next wave." On the bridge of the Void Hammer, Warlord Koth watched his fleet crumble around a single ship. This was not possible. This could not be happening. The humans were winning. 1 ship against hundreds, and they were winning. "Sir," his officer said quietly, "there's something else. Look." On the display, a small shuttle had detached from the starward venture. It was accelerating directly toward the Void Hammer. "What is that?" The officer's voice shook. "Our sensors show it's carrying a reactor core. The same kind that powers their ship." A human voice crackled over the communication system. Koth did not recognize the speaker. "This is Lieutenant Cole Bishop of the starward venture. My crew and I volunteer for this mission. For Serenhal. For Earth. For everyone who needs to know that someone will come when they call for help." A pause. "See you on the other side, Captain. It's been an honor." The shuttle struck the Void Hammer's engine section at full speed. The flagship died in a ball of fire that lit up the sky above. Serenhal, Warlord Drazen Koth died without understanding what had happened. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had destroyed fleets and armies and civilizations. He had never met anyone willing to die for strangers. That was the difference between the Vorath and the humans. The Vorath fought to take. The humans fought to protect. And those who fight to protect something they love will always outmatch those who fight only for themselves. The remaining Vorith ships scattered. Without their warlord, without their flagship, they fled into the darkness of space. They would carry stories back to the Dominion. Stories of a single ship that stood against an armada. Stories of creatures who smiled as they fought and laughed in the face of death. Stories of humans. The starward venture hung in orbit above Serenal, battered and broken but still flying. On the surface below, colonists emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky in wonder. The myths had come to save them, and the myths had won. The recording played on every screen across the Galactic Concordat. Billions of beings watched in silence as a single human ship fought an armada. They watched the impossible maneuvers. They watched the precision strikes. They watched the boarding parties fail against creatures half their size. And they watched a small shuttle fly directly into the heart of the enemy flagship, carrying volunteers who knew they would not survive. When the recording ended, no one spoke. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy understood why the ancient species had been afraid. The myths were real, and they were more than the stories had said. High Chancellor Vathan stood in the great hall, waiting for the humans to arrive. His hands trembled, though he would never admit it. He had called them monsters. He had rejected their help. And they had saved his people anyway. The doors opened and Captain Daniel Morrison walked in. He was wounded. Burn marks covered his arms, and he moved with a limp from injuries that would have killed most species. But he walked with his head held high, and behind him came his crew, every one of them damaged, but none of them broken. Vathan stepped down from his platform. For the first time in his long life, he approached someone as an equal rather than a ruler. "Captain Morrison," he said, "I owe you an apology. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Morrison looked at him with tired eyes. "We didn't do it for payment. We didn't do it for thanks. We did it because it was right." "I know," Vathan replied. "That is what terrifies me most." He extended his hand. It was a human gesture, one he had learned from the old texts. Morrison stared at it for a moment, then reached out and took it. The handshake was broadcast across the galaxy. The moment the myths joined hands with reality, in the days that followed, everything changed. The quarantine barrier around Earth was dismantled. Human ships began arriving. Dozens at first, then hundreds. They had been preparing in secret, building vessels capable of interstellar travel, waiting for the day when they could finally break free. Concordat discovered that humanity had not been idle during their 3,000 years of imprisonment. They had advanced. They had grown. They had become something the ancient species could never have predicted, and they were not. Angry, Kiravel became the first official ambassador to Earth. She stood on a hill overlooking a human city and watched children playing in the streets, their laughter carrying on the wind. "I don't understand," she said to Dr. Samuel Ortiz, who had volunteered to be her guide. "We locked you away. We let you become forgotten. You should hate us." Ortiz smiled in that strange human way that showed happiness rather than threat. "We can hate you. We thought about it when we first learned the truth. But hate doesn't build anything. It only destroys. We've done enough destroying in our history. We want to try something different now." "What?" "We want to build. Together." Elder Sorvine spent his remaining years recording the new history. He called it The Return, and it told the story of how humanity came back to a galaxy that had forgotten them. Not as conquerors, not as monsters, but as friends. He included the names of those who had died in the Battle of Serenal, Lieutenant Cole Bishop, and the shuttle crew who had sacrificed themselves, the Marines who fell defending the ship, the engineer who had kept everything running until his heart gave out. He made certain that the galaxy would remember them. On the anniversary of the battle, a memorial was built in orbit above Serenhal. Species from across the Concordat came to visit. They left flowers and gifts from their home worlds. They read the names carved into the stone, and they whispered thanks to the strangers who had died for them. The Vorth Dominion did not recover. The stories that their surviving ships carried spread through the Empire like wildfire. The humans were real. The humans had won. And if the Dominion continued its conquest, the humans would come for them. Fear is a powerful weapon. For the first time in generations, the Vorth chose peace. Captain Morrison was offered command of a new fleet, a combined force of human and Concordat ships meant to protect the galaxy from any future threats. He accepted on one condition. "We don't fight to conquer," he told the council. "We don't fight to dominate. We fight to protect. The moment we forget that, we become the thing we're fighting against." The council agreed. Years later, a young Vorth prisoner was being transferred between worlds. His ship docked at a station where a human marine was standing guard. The Vorth recognized the patches on her uniform. She was from the ship that had destroyed his fleet. "You are Sergeant Reyes," he said. Nina Reyes looked at him with eyes that held no hatred. "I am. Why did you come to Serenhal? Your people had no connection to those colonists. You had just escaped your prison. You could have gone anywhere, done anything. Why did you fight for strangers?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she answered the same way her captain had answered Kiravel so many years ago. "Because they needed help." "That's enough." The Vorth stared at her. He did not understand. His people fought for territory, for resources, for power. The idea of fighting simply because someone needed protection was foreign to everything he knew. But as he was led away, he found himself thinking about it. And something in his heart that had been closed for his entire life began, slowly, to open. That was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their weapons, not their tactics, not their fearsome reputation. It was the simple truth they carried with them wherever they went. Help those who need it. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Stand up for what is right, even when it costs everything. The myths had returned. But they were not the monsters the old stories described. They were something far more dangerous. They were hope. And across the stars. Wherever beings looked up at the night sky and wondered if anyone would come when they called. They now knew the answer. Humanity was out there. Humanity was listening, and humanity would answer.